All right, people, welcome back to the Performance Playbook. Today, I've got a fantastic guest that's been pretty monumental within my athletic career. Brad Foltz, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me, Brando. It's nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, hell yeah. So I kind of wanted to take this in a semi-different direction, at least to start off. And so, Brad, you're a sports psychologist, just so people can kind of know right off the bat. But for you, like you've helped my journey going into my Olympic trials, monumentally is how I kind of tell people. Not to jazz you up too much, and I want you to jazz yourself up for a bit, but I was thinking we could kind of take this podcast, at least at the beginning of going through my story, so people can kind of connect and understand maybe what you do.
Sure.
And understand how they can be helped by a sports psychologist specifically. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, happy to talk about it.
Perfect. So I think I wanted to start with the specific scenario of when I first came to you. And we can kind of talk through certain pieces there, but just for people to understand and want to maybe gain the perspective of going to a sports psychologist, but what would be your intro, like at a bar spiel on why anyone should, go into a sports psychologist and start, expressing what's going on?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. One of the things when I talk to an athlete for the first time that I try to help them think about when it comes to performance is evaluating like one of four areas. So if we're having a challenge or we're hitting a roadblock on something, is it a tactical issue, a technical issue, a physical issue, or a mental related issue, right? So you think of tactical, a lot of times are going to be things you can work on with an individual coach or somebody on your team usually. Physical issue might be something medical, so injuries or recovery, or it might be working with like a strength coach. So maybe there's working on flexibility or explosion and things like that. And then the last phase I always look at is mental. Is all right, if we can look at a skill or an area that somebody's trying to perform, and we're not really seeing a difficulty or any kind of deficit tactically or technically. Physically, we seem like we're doing well, we have enough strength, we have the ability to do the skills that we're being asked to do. Then I start to really need like maybe there's a mental block or something mentally going on is either impacting confidence, ability to concentrate, filter out distracting stimuli when we're performing. That's when we start looking at from the psychology perspective, just sport-wise, what we can do to look at improving those areas. On top of that, so in my professional role, I'm a sports psychologist, but I'm also a counseling psychologist. And I think something that athletes sometimes underestimate for themselves is that the life outside of sport can impact sport, vice versa. And I think a lot of times folks get this idea that you're just going to compartmentalize everything separately and nothing outside of sports going to impact sport, and sport's never going to impact my life outside of. Ask any student athlete who has 4 finals in a week how their practice goes that week. It's really hard to fully separate it. So for me, I want to help athletes consider not only just seeing a sports psychologist for performance, but also just for overall well-being. Are they able to handle the anxiety and stress and pressure? Are they able to manage relationships and conflicts and roommates issues and relationship stress? Because all of those can also impact performance, but also overall well-being. And I think it's really that wild to say a healthy athlete is a good athlete. They're the ones that are going to perform at their highest level. And health isn't just physical health. There's a lot of other aspects to health that go into it.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think it's interesting too, because I feel like this generation's starting to change to where they see, we'll call therapy, all therapies, to be a net positive. Because you go back to, let's just say, the boomers, and it's, there's a very negative connotation to it. And you talk to any parent of we'll say millennial or even a Gen Z, and they're like, well, yeah, like I don't need to see a shrink. And then there's the negative connotation right there. You're like, well, like, wait, it's actually super helpful. And so it bleeds down into those generations. Cause I remember before I recognized, cause I think that's the first step, is to recognize, hey, like I could be substantially better if I fix my mind, because it takes a long time to recognize, well, I didn't have a really good competition. Well, was I tired? Was I this? Was I that? But it always walks back to the mind. Every single time it goes back to the mind. And it took me so long to figure this out. But I think maybe you describing what you do, and maybe I'll guide the question this way. Do you think you more so change people's minds, or do you just guide them in a better direction?
Good question. So I think one, also speaking to what you mentioned a minute ago, yeah, the stigma has been a big issue for a lot of athletes. Culturally as a society, I think we're getting better, and but within sport, there's still that mentality of, mental toughness, meaning pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And, an example I often give folks is, in what area in your life do you ever demonstrate toughness by pretending something doesn't exist? You never demonstrate toughness or strength by skipping going to the gym or not doing a dive from the 10 meter. You go out and you actually make those attempts and try to get better at it. And that's how you get stronger, right? So you're absolutely right about the stigma part. Now, more specifically to your question, I don't think I ever change anybody. My role is to help folks like you or athletes or folks come in, identify areas where they feel like, what, something's not quite working the way that I want it to. I'm getting up there to compete and I'm not focused on what I need to focus on. Or, my energy's low and it's because I've been dealing with a lot of stress or these type of things. And so I see my role in helping individuals identify those things for themselves. And then, like you even said it, more coming alongside them. I picture in my mind, putting my arm around them and just being with them as they go on that journey to where they need to find. It's not like, and gosh, you talk about millennials and all that. I feel old because I use movie references sometimes. Yeah. It's not like the movie Inception, right? Where I'm going to plant an idea in your mind and all of a sudden you're going to change the way you think. My hope is that you see, or the athlete I'm working with sees what they need to change, identify, like you even mentioned earlier, more awareness of what's going on, and then helping them figure out the best strategies to get there and to make those changes for themselves. So if any sports psychologist or anybody that talks about being a mental coach tells you they're going to change somebody, go the other way. Find someone that's going to help you make the change, not say they're going to change you.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just before we jump back to like examples of me and you being able to kind of reframe ideas, just because this is another thing that I've heard. How does someone necessarily discern between a therapist that does actually work with them well versus not? And how do they know what's right for them?
Yeah, so that's also, it can be a little bit of a challenge because fit is very important when it comes to working with a psychologist, therapist, because you may find someone that's highly recommended and find that just personality-wise you don't fit, the way they approach things. It's not necessarily that the therapist, psychologist is bad or the athlete or client coming in has something wrong. Just sometimes it's a goodness of fit. I like to describe when I work with athletes, I often tell them, like, I'm a pretty direct person. I try to be very direct with the things I'm observing and helping us get there. And if somebody's not comfortable with that, then maybe we need to find another approach that fits them. Ideally, if you're working with a mental health professional or psychologist and you feel like it's not a good fit, that individual is open enough to hear that feedback and adjust their approach. Mm-hmm. If not, then it may be worth considering another option or finding another person that might be a better fit. I would say that, it's hard to necessarily put like a deadline, like, oh, after 6 meetings, you should be at a certain spot. I think that's a person by person judgment. You have to kind of evaluate, like, does this feel like it's working for me? Yeah. I try to make it a practice for me that after every, 3-4 appointments, after we initially start, I usually try to check in with somebody, like, all right, how does this feel like it's going? What's working? What's not? What do we want to adjust? So I think that's what I would be looking for, is somebody that's willing to be adaptable to the needs of the individual coming in instead of just being prescriptive, saying, you're going to do this my way or no other way. And I think, sometimes looking at recommendations, referrals, people, I think that I know for a fact here at Purdue, when I know that one of our athletes had a good experience with myself or Dr. Dawson, is all of a sudden I'll see 3 more athletes on that team come in about a week later, right? And so I think that also helps that, all right, this is somebody that has had a good interaction with somebody I know that I trust, and so I can go in and maybe give that an honest shot of trying it out. But I really think it comes down to fit, because I think there's people that are probably the best psychologists in the world that an athlete will meet with them and think I don't like it. And so what I would encourage folks is don't give up just because the first experience isn't exactly what you want, because sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But if it's not, try another option and see if it might be a better fit for you. The personalities may fit, the approaches may fit, and then you might find it really clicks and you get to the place you want to get to.
Yeah. And I think this is interesting for me too, is when I was coming in to you, I think I got lucky because I needed someone that was like very stern. Like, I'm going to tell you it this way, because I think back then I had a tendency to like walk all over a situation or completely take over, because, you know, that's where I kind of was in that time of just kind of like taking over conversations. And I needed to be like, no, like this is how it is. And like, I want you to look at it this way and give it a try. Now I feel like I'm in at least more of a situation to where I can have conversation. I can actually sit and listen, which is good. But I think I got lucky when I first came into you, because I was just recognizing that, okay, hey, I do have a problem, and I think I do need to address it. And so for people to understand this, I'm on 10 meter, right? 33 feet up. And again, I was kind of what you said. I just hid my problem thinking that it wasn't a problem, because if I don't address it, then it's not a problem. And what I noticed was I'd either be not even just like hyperventilating or getting so amped up for even a specific dive, but this is, I think, maybe the first or second meeting you and I had, when I literally just said the word Olympic trials, and my hands are kind of like shaking, and I'm breathing different. And so you even took me through a breathing pattern to where I constricted and contracted when I said it, and then I kind of relaxed. And I think it's such an important thing to recognize that for people, these situations aren't quick fixes, but it's a long-term investment, just like, again, any strength training, you name it. Like, it takes a long time to fix. I'm not going to come into a meeting with you and instantaneously be like, oh, yep, that changed my mind instantaneously. That's the way to go. And so I don't know if you can kind of speak on that and maybe go over that idea of maybe why I was getting so hyper anxious. And, you know, we talked about the theme of just like almost letting go of the dream, because I was almost suffocating it. If you want to go over those ideas.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the way I summarize it for folks a lot of times is, not to oversimplify it, but to kind of help make it feel maybe a little bit more clear. Anxiety and worry live in the future. Mm-hmm. And frustration and things like sadness or depression typically live in the past. So if we're in that state when we're performing and we're feeling more anxious than we need to be, or maybe we're feeling frustrated or disappointed in ourselves, usually that to me shows that we're not really present with what we're doing. And it's really hard, not just sport, any task, to perform it at your best ability if you're not just there, focused and able to do it. And so as you're talking about, focusing on Olympic trials, right? And that's so difficult for, high level elite athletes. Like, you all have such high goals, and there's nothing wrong with having those goals. But on a Wednesday in the middle of December, when we're trying to practice a dive and we're, a good chunk away from the Olympics or trials and these type of things, focusing on that long-term goal is not going to help you in that moment. Instead, what it is creating anxiety, worry. Like, well, it creates pressure, almost makes it, this dive means that I will make the Olympic team. And it doesn't. And I think that's what sometimes folks get this in their mindset is, I have to do it. I have to be perfect. And they have, I think a lot of times athletes, especially elite athletes, when it comes to skill, they get this idea that improvement's a linear progress. Every day is going to be better than the next. And it's just really not possible. If you had a day you were doing 10 meter, but the day before you did a heavy leg day lifting, I would probably say, hey, you're probably not going to perform your best today. Not because of a lack of skill or not because you're taking a setback. It's just you grew in a different way in terms of strength that is going to help maybe. So technically today we're not doing so well. So we need to maybe look at what other aspects are we growing in that day. So if technically we don't have the ability because we're wore out from lifting, how are we working on our tactical ability? How are we working on the mental approach to what we're doing, being present? So I think that is a big hurdle that a lot of athletes run into, is they get really focused on these future goals and making today carry all of the way to that future goal. And it comes down to partly too, um, and I know sometimes athletes get tired of hearing this from coaches and this, but it's true. It's an over focus on outcome goals. So
Mm.
like those things like winning, making a team, minutes, things like that, versus process goals, where process goals being more of how am I improving today? What kind of things am I doing to get closer to that outcome? How am I getting better, mentally today? What is my approach? How am I handling the tactical approach to what I'm doing today? Because when we get out of that focus on process growth, we get focused on the outcome, which takes us into the future. And that's where anxiety is going to live.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of times too, a lot of athletes, by the time they get to college, they get to this level, hadn't really ever had to take a real hard look at that part of their, regimen, how they perform, because y'all are really good.
Yeah.
And so to this point, you just went out there and did it. You performed and you were really skilled. And now when you get to college and these bigger goals are starting to get closer, now it's time we need to start looking at how are we approaching these things mentally and taking that more process related focus. And so for like with you, as you're talking about, we just try to disconnect a little bit of that high level of stress that was triggered by thinking about the future. Creating a little bit of that fear of like today is going to impact that too much, and just trying to take a more of a realistic view of what we're doing that day, which is I'm just trying to work on this dive.
Yeah.
And how can we just improve the skills today? And so when we can do that, usually it really helps reduce a lot of that stress and helps really make the practice and the preparation for performance go much smoother.
Yeah. Can you go over that concept? I don't even know what it's called, but where I was completely contracting and I'm thinking about the idea and then actively releasing everything.
Sure.
What is that called? And, why would that be beneficial?
Yeah. So what we did was more or less like a version of what's called progressive muscle relaxation. And so what we are trying to look at is what kind of physiological response were you having to the thought of Olympic trials? And what we noticed, and I remember you talking about it, you could see a physical response, like you could see it, like the stress would just like hit you like a wave. And so what we were trying to look at is one, helping you become more aware of how that thought was impacting you physically. Because I don't think people realize that sometimes, that the way they think can impact how they physically are feeling. Some people will notice maybe their stomach hurts and they're anxious, but we'll carry muscle tension, we'll feel jittery, all those type of things. Hyperventilation can happen.
Yeah.
And so what we were trying to help you do was become more aware of how this was impacting you physically, and then learning how to release that stress more on cue. So, saying it, kind of bringing that to mind as we get tense, and then trying to just visualize seeing it. There's a lot of ways you can visualize it, or just kind of imagine that image, that word kind of floating away from you as your body becomes more relaxed. Because we're trying to help at that time just to let go of that thought needing to be so important to you on a day-to-day basis, where it was just, I think at the time, it felt like it was, you woke up every day and you had to see it. You had to think Olympic trials, Olympic trials,
Yeah.
Olympic trials. And so the idea is we can let go of that thought. It's not going to disappear. You can always come back to it when you need to. But right now, we're going to tense ourselves up, feel that tension as we bring it to mind. And as we see it or feel it leave us, let the energy go out and just relax. And so we're just trying to get more connected with what our body was telling us and using our thoughts to help connect with what we were feeling.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting for me because I kept consistently doing that every time I would think about Olympic trials. And over time, it did kind of just let it dissipate. Even though I think the other thing that we did that I thought was so important, that built such a foundation for me, was creating that dream, that pipe dream, whatever it was for me. So we'll call it the Olympics. You had to almost like lower the importance. And I remember having this conversation with you, and not like I was getting mad, but I never thought about not making it before. And then, really going over that and talking about, hey, like, you're going to be okay if you don't make it, because it's not like this world defining thing. And for me to hear that was like, at first you just punched me in the face. And
Hmm.
how dare you say that to me? Cause it's the only thing I've had for the past, and then it's the tense, and I start freaking out. And I started to recognize the more we talked about it, because I don't think that wasn't like a one-time session, let's talk about this. Like, that took time for me to actually buy into that.
Yeah.
What's kind of like the purpose of talking about and learning and understanding both sides of a goal and a dream?
Yeah. Well, I think in that reaction, that initial reaction you talked about is very common, right? Because I think people interpret that as like, you're telling me I shouldn't have this goal, this dream. Like, that is not what the target is.
Mm.
But the idea is, at least, and the way I think of it and I work with athletes, is when we have such a focus, a lock on, a grasp so tightly on that kind of long-term goal, we start to experience more of almost like a threat on a day-to-day basis. Like, and threats are frightening. Something's threatening our well-being, and I think a lot of times athletes over associate that goal with their identity as a human being. Like, I am an Olympian, or I need to be, or otherwise it invalidates everything that I do. I'm not worth anything.
Mm.
And so then we start looking at, well, if this doesn't go the way I want, my identity as a human being is being threatened. And that's scary. Anything you think of like the very, classic fight or flight response, right? When we feel threatened, our fight or flight response get activated. And that's when we get anxious, or we get tight, or we freeze, and those type of things. And so what we were trying to talk about with you, and what we just in general, I talked a lot with athletes about, is that your identity has a lot more diversity to it than I think we realize. Because when you started developing an athletic identity, a lot of times you were like 6, 7 years old. You're a kid, and not many small children are great with like, I'm gonna really think diverse about my identity and how I'm gonna develop it. They just think, boy, when I perform well, my dad or my mom or my uncle or my family gets excited, and that's fun. And so what we tried to work on a little bit is, one, separating our identity and our worth as a human from what we do in our sport. Um, and I think that's a really challenging thing. Like you said, that's usually not a one-time conversation. That's over time. But also, I think it's helpful to think about sometimes is what would be the worst case if I don't do it? And if I remember right, I think one time, if I remember you kind of talked about it, kind of clicked, was you just started talking about like, well, if I don't, well, I'm going to go on a vacation. And I remember you talking about like, I'm going to take a trip, and you're like, that trip down does sound pretty good. So it's like, worst case scenario, I'm going to take a vacation.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. And
Yeah.
I think that helped unlock it a little bit. So I think sometimes we take it to this catastrophe zone, like it's going to be the worst thing in the world. When in reality, it may not be what we wanted, but it'll be all right.
Yeah.
And once we realize that there's more flexibility and there's more ways that things can be okay, it helps remove some of that threat. And so the idea was never to tell you, don't aspire to be what you want to be or achieve what you want to achieve. It's that we don't need to have it so intertwined with your identity that it creates fear.
Yeah.
And once we separated that, I think it helped unlock a little bit of that stress and a little bit of pressure you were feeling. And then I think that holds for most athletes. We can just separate our identity from our outcomes and what we're going to perform, what we want to achieve. Oddly enough, performance goes up. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tell people, again, old movie reference was a movie, Forgetting Sarah Marshall. It's not that old, but
it's a
feels
great
makes you
movie.
old.
Great movie.
But there's a scene in that movie where Paul Rudd's telling Jason Segel, do less when it comes to surfing, right? And that's why I kind of joke around with athletes sometimes. It's like, do less when it comes to thinking about, you don't have to think about this all the time. Do a little less. And I promise it'll, oddly enough, help you perform better. And I think that was kind of the sensation we were trying to get to with you a little bit.
Yeah. It is funny though, because that's kind of how I had it implanted in my head is if I take away or if I add in this other, option of not making it, I don't care as much. I'm going to go down in performance because, I'm not going to walk into practice like I have to, train super hard. In reality, like there was no, like I start to think about it in like yin and yang. Like there was just no balance. Like it was it was so one-sided that the stress was just blown out beyond proportion. And then, we'll get to this part at some point, but like it starts to seep outside of training. And so, it's that faulty, which you just brought up. It's that faulty thought of, hey, this is going to make me better if there's no other option. There's no other option. There's no balance. And once we started talking about that and talking about, hey, if you don't make it, like you can for once in 20 years, like chill out. You could go on a vacation that you've said no to every single summer because, your friends might be going climbing outdoors or backpacking, and I have to stay inside, and I have to make sure I can't get hurt, and I have to make sure this, and this, and this. And so it did relieve a lot of stress. And again, it's like for people, if you can really try to ingrain that in your brain, if you don't get it, it's okay. Like it's going to be okay. That doesn't, like you said, it doesn't invalidate everything that you did for the past, let's say 20 years. You just, again, look at the whole journey within itself. And so I think because of the conversations we had, I started walking into practices, having 10 times more fun, training 10 times better because I was smiling. I was more relaxed. I wasn't so tense on 10 meter. I thought I was going to die. And so I found this perfect happy medium of where, I could walk in, know I'm training hard, and know that whatever the outcome is, me doing this right now isn't going to necessarily change that. I mean, over time, yes, it will, right? Because we're putting in the little pieces, but by, being a healthier me, it starts to reframe the mind, and then your performance changes. So I thought that was super important.
Yeah, well, I think too, as you're kind of talking about it, something I always try to help people understand is worrying is not the same as caring, and worrying is not the same as planning. And I think a lot of times that's what people get in this mindset of, it's like, if I'm not worrying about it, that means I'm not caring. No, you can absolutely care without going into the worry state. Worrying is typically just trying to give us a false sense of control over something we can't control in the moment. And so caring is like, what am I going to do today? All right, I'm going to train well. I'm going to focus. Planning is kind of putting those steps in place. Worry is, oh my God, if I don't do it, my life's over and just sport's not worth it and I'm a worthless person. Those aren't going to get you any closer to achieving your goal. And I think that was where you were kind of in that state. I think a lot of athletes get into is like, I have to worry and think about this to show that I care.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a, a ratio that has to break down for any athlete. But I think a lot of times folks take that ratio too far. And like you're talking about, it's like, I have to live it and breathe it at all times.
Yeah.
And, you know this better than just about anybody. Yes, there's certain things, right? Like when you're training, you probably can't go out and do everything you want to do or eat everything you want to eat because you're trying to maintain your health and your fitness. But there's a lot more flexibility there than I think folks realize.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the other piece that we started working on when I first came to you, and this again was like, this doesn't feel right, or it's, we're starting to add work outside of our meetings, was journaling. And I mean, instantaneously you bring up the point because we were talking about it, was like, hey, I can walk you to the water. I can walk a horse to water, but I can't make you drink. I can't make you journal, but like you could at least, describe why it'd be beneficial, X, Y, Z, blah, blah, blah. And so that was the next piece for me that was huge, was being able to consistently journal. And I think I'll first kind of speak from my perspective, what it did. And I try to really emphasize this to a lot of like younger athletes I work with, or even athletes that are at my stage that are struggling, is I go, if you could walk into every single practice and instead of just kind of float through the practice, you could go home and reanalyze everything you did. And so you're actually learning from every training session. And I think the piece that I was in love with was how I structured it and how we kind of talked about it. I had the goals for the day, the cues for my dives, and then the overview. And so I would do the goals and the cues. So I'd walk into practice already kind of ready mentally to walk into doing the dives how I wanted them. And then if they didn't happen, the overview, I got to walk through every piece. Well, why didn't this cue work? Why didn't this work? And then I got to release my practice, let go, and then move on. And so I always try to tell people, I'm like, what you do is you go from training to intentionally training. And so even if it's a bad day, that's good, because you could learn so much, like 10 times what you could learn from a good training session, and, just going, oh yeah, that was super fun, go home, move on, versus maybe even having a bad practice and going, whoa, that was really beneficial. Like me getting my arms through freaked me out. Why? And then now let's work through those pieces. And so, journaling for me really changed the game, especially when I got into hard situations. Why do you necessarily kind of prescribe that for people?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit, is to try to add a little bit more intentionality to some of the things that we're doing. So I think journaling could take a lot of different structures. I mean, some athletes and folks I work with use it more of just a stress dump. I'm going to write everything I stress about, close the book, and I know that it's my stress is put away from the day. A lot of folks use it kind of how you're talking about, a more structured approach, set my goals, one of my cues, and those type of things can really be great for tracking. I think, like you said too, it's really good, good use of it is if you're taking an intentional approach and journaling and looking at what you're learning and how you're growing and all those things, it actually, at least in the way I think of it, it eliminates the possibility of a bad practice.
Yeah.
Because one way or the other, you can grow or learn something from that practice. All right, maybe physically today, I wasn't performing the way I wanted to, or whatever it may be, but tactically, I got better today. With my approach to the dive was really, really good. Maybe my shoulders really hurt me, so I couldn't physically do the technical skill that I wanted to, but I was really locked in. Or, mentally, I was really relaxed when I went to go to dive. And so it takes practice from being one version of good, which is I need to be nailing these dives in practice, to there's 3, 4 different ways I could grow today and get better.
Yeah.
And so journaling can help give you some of that structure, some of that approach to track it. I think another part is, I think this holds true in most areas we try to grow. We can track our progress. It helps build confidence. And so you can see the way you grow. And kind of as you talked about, when it comes to the mental approach to performance, the changes aren't going to be so drastic and immediate that it's so clear, right? Like, oh, this clicked, now it's completely different. A lot of times it's a gradual progression and improvement. And so if you can track it, you can see how you've grown over time to help you recognize how you have grown. Because without that, sometimes people just don't notice it. Yeah. And then on top of it, you kind of also touched on this a minute ago, and that's I think is tough for some folks, is realistically, when you're working with a psychologist, therapist, sports psychologist, whoever it may be, the real change and growth occurs between your appointments with the psychologist. Yeah. I think sometimes folks think, well, I go in and I won't think about this again until I talk to them in a week or two or whatever it is. And that can help a little bit. But really, to make that growth or that improvement, it's what you're doing and how you're applying it every day. And so the journal can sort of serve a purpose of letting you be your own psychologist, to kind of hear yourself, what you're thinking, tracking the kind of thoughts and feelings that you're having. A lot of times noticing like, oh man, my self-talk today was awful. I was just so hard on myself. So, just being aware of those things so you can start practicing how to change those ideas and those concepts that you're working with your psychologist on, that, like you said, I can't be there to necessarily help you. I can't be in your head every day. Yeah. And so to help you work on that on your own and then be able to make that step-by-step progress is much more efficient than just waiting for the appointments and hoping that you remembered what you were working on. Or because I've had folks come in and be like, 2 days ago I knew what I wanted to talk to you about, now I forget. It's like, well, if let's journal it a little bit, so that way you can just bring it in and we can open it up. Yeah. And then another approach that I really like is I had an athlete, this was some time ago, and this, I'll give them credit, this wasn't me, but they had started doing journaling before I started working with them. And then they were competing at the Olympic level, and they had like a little box of a couple of journals, and they could then pull their journal out and see, all right, last time I did this competition at this location, this is how it went. This is what I was thinking. This is what I was feeling. This was what worked. This is what didn't work. And it basically gave them a roadmap to how to approach this next time. All right, these are the things I can change. These are the things I can't. And believe it or not, it's hard to always remember that just flat out. You guys are doing this so much that's probably going to be hard to remember, oh yeah, the one time I did this at Ball State, or whatever it might have been. So it gives you a little bit more of a roadmap to reflect on what worked, what didn't. Then you can just continue to grow from that. So there's a lot of real benefits to incorporating journal into the mental training of what we're doing.
Yeah. And I think you brought up so many important concepts there. It's like when you go into a strength training program, right? Like let's say you lift Tuesday, you don't build muscle Tuesday. You break down, you go home, and that's where the building begins. And so it's the same thing in my mind with, like sports psychology. We go in, we break down concepts, and then you leave and apply them. And so that's when it's like you're really building. And I think for a lot of people, if they can understand that you go to physical therapy to work on, little imbalances within your body, you go to strength training to make your overall health and strength more bulletproof or solidified so you don't get hurt and then you get stronger. You go to practice to train skill acquisition and get better at what you're literally doing. And then you go, here's the big piece, you go into sports psychology to lock in all of those pieces because, again, and I've said this in a lot of podcasts at this point, the body follows the mind. If the mind is astray, and you are literally anywhere but where you are on that athletic field, we'll just say for my instance, if I'm hanging off the edge of 10 meter and I'm not there mentally, I'm screwed. And we've been through this so many times. And I think I do have a good amount of good stories because I wanted to touch upon that other piece that you brought up is utilizing journaling as a roadmap. But just so people can, really deeply understand that, it's like, the sports psychology in my mind is like the glue, because it's like you can do all of these things. You could get so psychotically strong, so you can jump higher than anyone. You can spin faster than anyone. You can be, bulletproof so you don't get injured. But if your mind is not there, it's useless. Everything you're doing is useless. And I've tried to tell that to a lot of divers. It's, again, the strength is important. The training's important, but if you cannot put all those pieces together at a competition because you crumble, it's literally useless. It's useless. So that's like my big theme for a lot of people is, hey, if you're not going to see a sports psych and you maybe, which is fine if you have everything that you've got locked down, which I don't necessarily believe, because in my mind, the only reason why you wouldn't be going to a sports psychologist, and honestly, even in that situation, I think you should, but if you're winning the Olympics, like if you're walking in, murdering everyone like it's nothing, you walk out, you're relaxed and chill, okay, fine, because clearly like your mental game is fantastic. But outside of that, if you're getting second, if you're getting third, if you're not even making the semi, you need to go, because if you haven't recognized it, you need to look inward first and go, oh, like there's some pieces here that aren't consistently happening that I need to happen.
Yeah, well, I think it's like you were saying a minute ago, seeing a psychologist for, sport performance, we need to think of it not as I have a weakness, that's why I need to go in. It's like you were saying, I just want to make this a strength.
Yeah.
You're not weak because you go into the weight room to lift. You're not weak because you work on your diet. It's that these are areas I can make stronger. So this, I encourage athletes to think of it the same way with working with a psychologist. This is just an area to try to strengthen yourself in. And hell, even just as you're talking about, you make the Olympics, you win gold. You don't stop practicing.
Yeah.
If you want to keep diving, maybe if you're done, okay. Yeah. But if you continue to want to compete and do what you're doing, it's like, well, I did it. So I know I don't ever have to train again.
Yep.
Now I'm just going to show up in 4 years and I'll make it without doing any work. Well, I've watched you guys. That's not happening. You're not just assuming, right? And so I think that's the other part too, is that just because you do get to that area doesn't mean there's not ways to continue to be strong, to improve. Yep. So like you've been saying, like you go out and you're killing it, you're winning the gold. You still got to practice. You still got to work on these things. You're still, maybe you win the gold. Now the new stress is, I got to do it again. Or now I have the pressure. Now I have maybe some endorsement money. Now there's new pressure, new stress. There's a lot of ways that things can still be impacting us that can lead us down to that path feeling more stressed, even when we're really performing well. So I think it is important to think of it like, how can I continue to make this a strength?
Yeah. And even with the caveat, like if you're winning everything, that doesn't mean life outside of the pool is dandy. And so that was kind of a big thing for me, was like, okay, I'm doing well, I'm getting better. And we were talking about concepts, within diving, and then like eventually once we hit a point, I started bleeding in my external life because I was recognizing like, hey, I'm stressed out by this. And I literally can't get my mind off of it because now I'm in training thinking about, how my relationships suck with my family, or, my partner that I'm with isn't, we're having all these problems. And so it's like, it's always bleeding into what you're doing, like back and forth. And so again, even if you're winning, I think there is still a lot of utility within going to a sports psychologist, or even just the psychologist in general. Yeah. The other piece that I wanted to touch that you said, just so I don't forget, was the road mapping. And I'm pretty sure we were still together at this point, but my old synchro partner and I, we go to the World Cup to get the Olympic spot for synchro. We got it for individual, so we're laid back, we're chill. But we didn't have a lot of training together. And so it was already a high stress situation. We go and we don't get the Olympic spot. Uh-oh. And so the beautiful part was I was already journaling. And so we go through this super hard situation, and I get back to my hotel room and I just sit down and just hammer through a few pages. Usually that's not what I do. I usually write, hey, how can I change this or this? But like it was done. There's no more synchro. So I was like, well, let me just go through this situation because I know it's going to be incredibly important forward because we still have individual, but now I'm going to have to fight all of them to get my spot. And so I can flip back, and this is the line I tell everyone because it was so important for me to have that situation mentally. And I remember that day journaling because I wasn't consistent, and I can bring back the journal. You gave me the journal. It says Purdue on the front. But I always would write down the date. The date was very important. And so I date it. And then that moment I wrote, today's the first day I become an Olympian. And I think in my mind, the reason why I wrote that wasn't like, I'm cocky, I have to have this. I was like, no, today's the first day I'm going to start acting like it.
Yeah.
And I really started pouring myself into the mental side because I just watched myself completely crumble. And it was solely because of my mind. And so what I noticed from that point on is every single 10-meter practice, because like, again, there has to be a balance. I don't need a journal for lineups in the morning. Like there's no utility to that. So I'd be wasting my time. But where it'd be super beneficial is, hey, every time I'm on 10 meter, even if I don't necessarily feel like I need to, I'm just going to write out my thoughts and what my cues were, because if my let's say my inward 3.5 is going very well, I know my cues for when it was going well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always tell people that whole story because I started journaling every single 10-meter day. And all I saw was my progression just keep going upward. Not to say that all of my problems were fixed, but I was a hell of a lot more confident in what I was doing because of it. And so that roadmap is just so important to me. And I just try to spread that everywhere and just try it.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes too, we just as humans, once we feel like we feel comfortable with something, our brain doesn't necessarily always pay as much attention to it. So it's easy to sometimes get out of those habits that were working. And that's another reason it's so important to track those things, is knowing what worked at that time. Because then if you start focusing on something else, you're like, oh, wait, what was I doing? Like I remember when I first got to graduate school, I had to take an exam for the first time in a long time, like an actual sit down, take an exam instead of writing a paper. And I legit had to sit down and try to remember, how do I study for an exam? And this is something I did a ton at one point in my life, but I just couldn't remember it because I hadn't done it in a little while. And I think that happens with athletes too. We make some progress. We move on to the next thing, like, all right, that's good, I got it. And we kind of we don't get lazy with it. We just don't pay as much attention to it. And so having that roadmap, being able to reflect back on this is what I was doing so you can continue to build off really makes a big difference, that progression continue to build off each other instead of having to reset and try to rebuild something you'd already worked on and made progress on.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at journaling for people and they're able to first get into this moment, is there a specific process or a way of journaling that you usually prescribe? So it's like a baby intro, like, hey, just give this a try, because I feel like a lot of people, if I tell them, hey, just journal, they're going to stop after a day because they're like, well, I don't know, felt weird. I was just writing aimlessly. Like, is there a way that you have people journal when they begin?
I think there's could be some flexibility to it. I think a lot of times I try to start with, I try to identify an area that we're trying to work on. So a lot of times that's, very common, like self-talk. How are we speaking to ourselves? I think you've heard me, or if anybody here at Purdue has ever heard me talk, I always talk about, are you talking to yourself the same way you would talk to somebody you're trying to coach in your sport to be really good and confident? And so a lot of times I'll start there. I'll ask, all right, just write down the things you were saying to yourself when you were training. And then sit down and write a response to each of those as if you were trying to say that same thing, but to somebody you really cared about, wanted to be confident, and see if there's a difference. And a lot of times athletes will find like, oh man, like I would never say the things I'm saying to myself to like my friends or somebody I'm coaching, because it would make them feel awful. So that's a great way just to become more aware of what we're thinking. Sometimes I'll make sure I'll include things like a gratitude exercise, and just to get us in the idea of what did I get out of today? Even if today wasn't necessarily what I would call a great practice, what did I learn? And then from there, it's really can take a lot of different shapes. The structure you described earlier is a great approach to it. Identifying what your goals are, ideally, your process related goals, identifying what your cues or what you're trying to work on that day. And then at the end, summarizing, how did I do? How can I improve it? What would I change the next time? Uh, if anything, the only real structure that I always try to encourage people to do is, let's say we're using it as just a dump out stress or feel like, we're just getting rid of frustration. That's perfectly acceptable. But at the end, try to have something that points you in what you're going to do to address these things. How are you going to grow with this? How are you going to improve? I'd never like to see somebody just leave it in, all right, I'm just going to sit and talk about everything that I'm mad about and then just leave it there and stew in it, right? Same thing I do when I work with a team. If I work with a team, if we want to complain about what's happening, great. But then we're always going to end on what are we going to do to address it? Because that gives us a direction to go instead of just letting us just become a book of things that make me mad or things that make me sad. I want us to always look at what I did to improve those areas. So I think there's a lot of different approaches to it. Some very, very structured, almost like a worksheet. Some that are a little bit more open and flexible to be taken in direction that you want. But as we talked about earlier, same thing with working with a psychologist. Journaling works best when you find the structure and the mode that works best for you.
Yeah.
So I might tell you, try the structured version. You might say, like, I really like to just write it out and then kind of just identify goals. Excellent. Let's go that route. Because the last thing we want to do is turn into something that feels like it's homework that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
We want it to feel like, all right, this is a thing that I actually feel like benefits me, that I maybe not your favorite part of the day, but it's not something you dread, like, oh God, I got a journal at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I think making sure the structure fits you is really important. But the biggest guide is try to always have something about how you're going to what you got out of the day, or what are you going to do tomorrow to get something out of that day, just to give us something to end on that's building confidence, building that positive view of ourselves.
Yeah. It always felt like it was the perfect, like, putting the cap on the bottle for me. Like, it was always the end of my practice. Like, my practice didn't feel finished unless let me just get this out and then I'm done. Like, it's not that bad. And now my practice feels finished because I've topped it off with the mind being overviewed and then pushed away. And now I can move on, go home and kind of like relax.
I think that's really important, Brando, too. I think that, I ask, I do this, I kind of have the same spiels I do with athletes a lot, but I always ask, how many hours a week do you physically train for your sport?
Yeah.
And depending on the level and what you're doing, it could be, 10, 20, 30 more hours a week. But then I'll ask them, all right, how much of your sport at this level is mental? And almost to a person, they always go like 90% of my sport's mental now. At this level, your level, a lot of it is mental. You guys are very physically skilled, talented, everything, technically you have a lot of what you need, or if not, you're already there. And then so I was like, all right, you tell me that 80% of your sport's mental, and you spend 40 hours a week working on the physical part. How many hours a week are you doing mental training? And they're like, well, none.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, that's a ratio we need to change a little bit. Again, it's not, you don't have to spend 40 hours a week in mental training, but let's incorporate it as part of training. Mental training isn't just its own, it's not a separate thing. Just let's incorporate that, just like you're doing some strength training, just like you're doing technical training, mental training just built right into it. Spend 5-10 minutes a day working on this, and it's going to improve what you're doing and address that 80% of your sport that you're telling me is mental.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just to kind of touch on the last two pieces, these last two pieces I thought were interesting to bring up because these were when I didn't have you. And so it was interesting kind of going through these, we'll call them like roadblocks, and kind of working through and figuring out how to do it. Especially like I had the Team USA sports psych, Karen Kogan, but being able to kind of work these through a lot of solo work, but like I had so much behind me already to like help bleed into that was super interesting. And one of the things that I was having was I would wake up in the middle of the night. This was a little bit before trials, and then this was at the Olympics. And then obviously when I retired for 4 months, it didn't happen anymore. But I would wake up in the middle of the night to full-blown panic attacks. But it was just because of one dive, my arm stand. It would always freak me out. I couldn't conceptualize it. I couldn't figure it out. And I want to get your thoughts on what you thought of what I ended up doing, and we can kind of build on there. But the only way for me to stop having panic attacks for this dive was for diving, for people that don't know diving, you do like mental models before you do the dive to kind of reassure yourself or go, hey, like I have to focus on this, and you're doing it physically before you go. It helps some people. You'll see some people do it. You'll see some people that don't. I always had to do it, and it actually turned into a crutch for me. I would do it 3-4 times. If I'm not doing it, something feels wrong, and that would bleed into outside of practice to where I'm literally dreaming about getting lost or whatever, because I was just so unsure while I was even on the 10 meter. And so what I ended up doing was no more modeling, no more. And that's a weird concept. And the concept that I went back to is if you were to break down diving right to its lowest point, like I don't model if I do a flip in dry land. When I'm just doing a regular flip, I'm not, okay, yeah, sit in the squat, circle the arms. I never did that. And so I tried to bring that concept into my 10 meter, right? How can I make 10 meter seem small? Like a dry land flip, I'm not scared at all. And so what I actually had to do was walk backwards, and I had to bring it more into the body because my mind was just running too much to where I'm freaking out. And so the big piece there was I had to do less to quiet the mind. And by doing less, I actually started trusting myself within that process. And that was a big piece for me. I would recognize, I'd go home and go, I'm pretty relaxed because I'm not thinking about it. I'm not even thinking about it on 10 meters. So I don't have to think about it while I'm laying in bed, profusely sweating anymore. I get to not sweat in bed, which is great. What do you think about that concept and being able to work out of the mind sometimes and get into the body?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple pieces to that. So hearing you talk about it one of the things to always keep in mind for athletes as you're working on some of these mental components is there's a difference between a routine and a ritual. Right? Routines typically are structures put in place for us to get ourselves in the right mindset or right physical state to perform. Rituals become almost like superstitions. If we don't do it enough, we don't do it right, if it doesn't occur at the time we wanted it to, it becomes a space of fear or stress or like, oh my gosh, if I don't have my Starbucks at 30 minutes before competition, I won't compete. And so it sounds a little bit like, and again, I don't know, I wasn't part of this process with you. It sounds like a little bit it's turning into a ritual. You had to do it just the right way. Yeah. And I also think the human mind loves routines. It loves doing things similar. In a weird way, our brains are kind of lazy like that. Yeah. It just wants to do the same things, doesn't want to have to put energy into things. And so when you apply a different approach to that one particular dive than everything else, you get out of your routine. And when we're out of our routine, a lot of times that can be stressful. That can create a sense of like discomfort, like, oh, this is different. I don't like it. And the brain does not necessarily always like different. It likes to do things the same way. So I think taking that approach of stepping back, looking at physiologically, what are you doing with your body is a great approach to that. Yeah. I think that's a great step a lot of athletes can take. That's a lot of times the first place we'll go. I mean, heck, you talked about at the very beginning, right? When we talked about Olympic trials and you get tense, we looked at what your body was experiencing and tried to create a sensation physically of thinking about that idea and letting it go and letting our body relax. Because interesting enough, like you said, the body will follow the mind. That also the inverse can happen. If you can get your body just to be in a calm state, your mind will start following it because your mind listens to what your body tells it. So you think of like, you touch a hot pan on a stove, you pull your hand away, and then a split second later, your brain finally says, oh, that's hot. Because your body is designed to help address the things around us. So if your body's in a calm state, your mind will start to follow. So sometimes the inverse is really great. Instead of just taking from a top-down approach of change my thinking and then let that affect me physically, it's what can I physically do to help signal to my brain that I'm okay.
Yeah.
And sounds like that's what you were trying to do. And I think that's a really helpful approach.
Yeah. I think the lesson that I pull from there is, and I do think it was a ritual, again, right? It's easy to do a ritual. It's easy to stay with a ritual. That doesn't mean it's good. And so there's actually a lot more negative connotation to the ritual that I had, and it was negatively affecting me, but I needed that crutch. Well, no, I just and I did it for every dive. Like I did it for every single dive, and I noticed me walking into these dives on 10 meter a lot more relaxed. And the one example I always bring up is the Chinese divers. You see them walk on the 10 meter like they're just on flat ground.
Hmm.
Not all of them, but there's a lot of them that just look like, man, it's just another day. Like, I don't care if I'm on a new platform. I'm relaxed. They don't do anything. They semi dry off. They walk to the edge of the platform and then they do their dive for tens. Not to say that they don't have any other mental issues, but how relaxed they are to walk up to the dive and
Hmm.
do it is seamless. It just flows because they turn mechanical, where it's like, I can shut my brain off because their practice is 8 hours of just doing that dive a million times. And so I was like, how can I take a little piece of that? I can't do my dives for 8 hours. I'll break. They've had that forever. But what piece of what they have can I just kind of, manipulate to fit me? And so that
Yeah.
was the big piece that was like huge.
Yeah, well, I think, as you kind of talked about too, it's taking something that feels really big and just trying to shrink it down into something that feels like you can do something about. Because in the end,
Yeah.
like, think of diving. I hear, it's like, oh, uh, Olympic trials or nationals or whatever, that's bigger,
Yeah.
right? That's a bigger deal and it creates more stress but in the end, if you can really shrink it down, because I even remember you at one point talking about one of your physical cues, just feeling your toes on the platform and kind of digging in a little bit.
Mm.
And in the end, if you really just shrink it down to you're on a platform, as a diver, how many times have you been on this platform? Thousands and thousands of times.
Yeah.
You're 10 meters up, that's always going to be scary. It scares the hell out of me, but it's something you've done many, many times. So if you can just shrink it down to this idea of like, this is just a thing that I've done.
Mm.
The banner on the wall may not say, invite dual meet. It might say, nationals or Olympics, but in the end, shrink it down to the task that's in front of you.
Yeah.
You have done this dive how many times, and allow your brain and your mind to just be in that moment that you're in, and that allows your brain to get out of the way and
Mm.
let your body do the thing it knows how to do.
Yeah.
And I think with you, that's one of the things that we talked about is like your body can do this.
Yeah.
It's just allowing your brain to not present an extra barrier, letting your brain just take a break and let your body take over and do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the final piece that I had without you was going to the Olympics and then being done. And I have a film soon to be coming out going over this entire concept, but you can get everything you want, but nothing at the same time. And so, I had this big goal of making it, I make it, and then you get there, compete, go through. I didn't compete how I wanted to because of an injury. And then I even made it into the final, which was like my dream. And it was completely ruined by, this injury. But again, it's like, was it the injury or was it the perspective going in and out of that situation? But that was the one big thing I had to deal with. That's why I retired for 4 months, was just like, I was so, I guess for lack of a better term, I was like so distraught with my experience, my injury, that I was just like, I can't. And so I think it'd be interesting to just kind of end this with that, building on this concept of like, hey, even going into an NCAA or going into a big meet for whoever it is, you do need to have some form of yin and yang, to where it's like, you could win, but it's not going to solve anything. Like, it's not whatever you're thinking of. And it was even like me meeting other Olympians. They were just regular people. Some of them were worse people because they thought they were gods amongst men. And you're like, please calm down. Like, please. So I think that concept of, walking into a lot of these competitions, and more so walking out of them in a healthy mindset, is harder than most people even expect. And you see that with like the suicide rate, or like the wanting to be suicidal or being suicidal once you're done with an Olympic experience. What's your mindset on that?
Well, I think that a lot of that comes down to kind of, we talked a little bit about earlier, but it's our identity and our self-worth gets so tied to these outcomes. But what we find is that those are like temporary band-aids for our self-image, how we actually see and view ourselves. We see ourselves, a lot of times athletes, as being only worth what we can produce.
Hmm.
I call it the curse of the high achiever. Of these folks that are high achieving, because you achieve so much, it becomes easy to kind of build those up as how I determine my worth as a person, not as an athlete, not as somebody that's doing a sport, what essentially should be a game, right? These are all designed to be games that we turn into sports and turn into have all these meaning. And so I see this a lot. I've had athletes who've won national titles who will sit down and be almost in tears because they still don't feel good about themselves. They don't feel good enough. I think we see this a lot with Olympic athletes. Even athletes who win gold will sit and say like, I still feel like unfulfilled. It's because really that space within them they're trying to fill can't be filled with an outcome, a result, a medal, a reward. It can only be filled by developing a real sense of self and
Yeah.
trust that they're good enough and they're worthwhile people regardless of the result.
Yeah.
And so I think that is very common. That's why you talk about Olympic athletes. I think some that have really shared, like Michael Phelps has shared that.
Mm.
He's known as one of the greatest, if not greatest, swimmer in the history of the sport. And even talked about he didn't feel fulfilled by it. It wasn't enough to make him happy.
Yeah.
And so I think if in the end for any athlete, if somebody's listening to this as we're talking, really working on can you be a healthy, well-rounded human being first, because it's the human being that's got to go compete.
Yeah.
And if you can address those things, if you're okay with yourself, regardless of the result, if you can take pride in the effort and the journey, as you want to talk about those process goals, but the journey to get to where you are, that can help you get through those moments. Even if the outcome's not what you want, you got to be in Tokyo. You got to be, you have to have these amazing experiences. I talk about this with some of our divers still of, look what you get out of this. Look what you've earned through all this. Enjoy that.
Yeah.
The outcomes are just the cherry on top of that sundae of everything that you've gotten out of this experience, all of the growth you've gotten to do, the relationships you've built. So I think if we can really emphasize that with our young athletes, our elite athletes, it'll make it a lot easier to have these experiences.
Yeah.
If making it the Olympics, Brando, is unbelievably cool.
Yeah.
And I think if any athlete, I sometimes I use this example, like if you were 8 and I would have told you, hey, you're going to make the Olympics. You may not win, but you're going to make the Olympics. What would you say? And most of the time athletes go like, yep, sign me up. I'm in. I'm in forever.
Yeah.
It's only when we get there and that curse of that high achiever kicks in, we think, well, that's not quite enough now.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily it has to be enough. It's just you are enough. You are good enough regardless of the outcome. And I think that's the piece that we really need to emphasize with our athletes, that you will be okay. You are worth it and are a good person and are valued regardless of the outcome. The outcome is just the reward for all of the effort and work that you put in.
Yeah. I started to think about it. It's like the curse of getting what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's like, in some scenarios, it might be better not to get it because there's, a lot of benefit. There's a lot of benefit on both sides, but it's just kind of funny to see people get what they want and just be so unfulfilled and so unhappy. But, again, along that journey, you got to learn with whatever path you end up being given. And so, I think it's beautiful. But this was a fantastic podcast. Hopefully, I think people can really gain a lot from, learning from my experience and faults and wins and whatever. But it's been an honor having you on, and hopefully we'll probably pull you back on at some point again.
Well, I really appreciate it. It's really great to talk to you. I hope to talk to you soon.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Brad. Have a good one.
Thanks.